like you, I attend workshops and seminars. And I've tried to do two things, I think, that have been helpful to me, and I suspect you're doing those as well. Number one is the person in the front of the room doing the seminar you expected. I've gone to a couple recently where it's clear I read the materials one way, the instructor read them another. We were at different seminars. That's always a problem, it seems to me. So if I'm not doing what you thought I was going to do today, I assume you'll jump up and down and wave and scream and holler and do whatever you need to do. Number two, when's the last time you sat for a day without a phone ringing, or without somebody coming through your door, or without some message that was extremely important that had to be acted on? So in a way, these days are gifts, aren't they? They are gifts to our mental health, one hopes. They are gifts to our intellectual capacity to grow. And they are gifts, I think, to our ability to survive in a business that's increasingly changing and increasingly more demanding. So I hope you think of the day that way. This is a refuge for a little while from the ordinary business of life. And perhaps in my touching on that ordinary business, I'll bring you back to it, but I hope you can take advantage of the time that's here to do something that rewinds your clock, as it were, gets you restarted. I have two things to do. One, I suspect from what I know that you don't all know each other. And no, we're not going to go around and introduce everybody, because that would take the morning and would be done. Although I know trainers that do that, and they could kill a lot of time that way. What I really would like you to do, however, is we always sit with people we know, but behind us, in front of us, are people perhaps we don't know. So for the next 15 seconds, would you turn front and back and just say hello to the person behind you, in front of you, introduce yourself. If I may. Thank you. Yes, I did hand you an empty workbook. It's all right, not to worry. It'll be full of your wisdom before the morning's done, and that's really what we wanted to do. How many of you can find the notes from the last workshop you attended? One, two. See if there's some obsessive people here. Most of us, certainly my experience is, and lots of my friends and colleagues, that keeping notes from workshops and seminars, even when we thought they were helpful and useful, is a management process that creates small dilemmas for us at times. So what I'm hopeful is that this little booklet, if you will, becomes a stable part of your resource base, and that from time to time you'll actually be able to find it and pull from it ideas and thoughts and observations that you've had today. One quick inventory. How many of you are volunteers in nonprofit organizations, serve on the boards of those organizations? Wonderful. Okay. How many of you are paid staff persons who carry the title executive director? Bless you. Yeah, so carry the title development director or a fundraising title of some sort? How many of you work in nonprofit organizations and do something other than executive director or development director in your role? Good. Well, so we're not homogenous. We figured that out. What we've got is a mix of people with a mix of responsibilities. I would suspect that all of us must have some responsibility for fundraising, and if that's true, then what you're going to have to do, based on what I share with you, is adapt it to your needs. That is to say, I cannot customize this probably beyond a certain point. So the challenge to you is to say, well, of all this stuff Schumacher's talking about, what really fits my organization? Then let me lift you above one little piece of script that seems to recur in workshops and seminars, and see if just for the morning we can't remove it from our psyches temporarily. It goes as follows. Gee, that's a nice idea, but we can't do that in my board won't. Lots of what won't work, right? In fact, we have catalogs of things that won't work. For this morning, let go of that, if you will, and see if there are some angles from which you can come at changing things in your organization, improving things in your organization that open up possibilities. How many of you are perfectly happy with the fundraising activity of your boards and volunteer groups? As I have an opportunity to travel, and one of the gifts of my life is that I get a chance to work with a lot of people in this field. Recurrently, when I say to people, what's the biggest fundraising problem you have? It isn't what I had thought it would be. We're not raising enough money. We don't have enough money. It's that I can't get the board engaged in fundraising. I can't get the board involved in fundraising. Or if it's not the board, I can't seem to get volunteers engaged in the process. So I want to take the time we have this morning to talk about that and talk about it in terms of principle and practice, so that what you do is create an environment where volunteers, and many of you are volunteers, as I am, serve on a couple of boards, think that fundraising is something they can do. Not embrace it. Not love it. I work with about 15 boards a year. If I said to those 15 boards, how many of you really love fundraising? I'd see about 4 hands. Those are kind of strange people, and we're happy to have them, but they're not lots of them. So what about all the rest of those folks who are engaged in fundraising as volunteers? Almost inevitably, it seems to me, they're doing it with some reluctance and with some extraordinary effort. And part of our jobs in this fundraising business is to enable that to happen. So I want to talk about that happening. And I want to work from these workbooks because it seems to me there's some obvious things. Isn't it wonderful? How many of you also do a lot of training and lead groups? Good. Isn't it wonderful that you get, I often find myself saying very obvious things that everybody, you figure everybody gets, but sometimes not the case. So let's look at page 1. Why they won't do it. Or why won't they do it? Two of the most obvious reasons emerge in my budgets, they pass the budgets, you think they get it. But somehow, they don't always. Number two, and this is a real trap. You know, but Gene's so good at fundraising, and look how well we're doing. Here I am, the board member. I really don't, I don't know what they need me to do. So, are you really good at fundraising? Are you bringing in a lot of money? If I were a board member sitting around the table, could I say to myself, isn't that nice? Every month we turn to Sue and we say, how you doing, Sue? How's the money coming in? And every month, because she's working 70-hour weeks and killing herself, she says, oh, it's doing fine. So, I'm not a board member, I figure, hey, I don't want to do it anyway, let her do it. Now, how do you successfully do your work as a professional and still help the board understand that that doesn't mean they can step back? I can't tell you the number of boards I've worked with who said to me, well, as soon as we hire a development director, that's it, we're out of it. It's done, we've got fundraising taken care of. Or, the executive director, she does that, she's terrific, really good fundraiser. The truth of that exercise becomes ringingly clear over time. Would you rather have one fundraiser or 15 fundraisers? Because one fundraiser has a capacity beyond what you usually can't go. As I watch staff-driven programs, they almost always peak. And they peak at a point where the staff is doing all it can do. It's a bit tricky because we have to deliver two messages to the board. I'm doing a fine job of fundraising and we need your help. Simultaneously. I want you to think for a minute again about your own organization. Are they looking down the table at you as a staff person and thinking, if not saying, gee, he's doing terrific. We don't really need to do this. It's not essential that we do. Or, subset, we've appointed a development committee. Good. Now, and I'm not on it, happily. So now, every 30 days, all I need to do is look down the table at the development chair and say, hey, how we doing? How's the fundraising going? What do good development committees do? Good development committees, once formed, go right around to face the board and say, y'all come now. Because you're our team. And without you, we can't get the job done. Why the pressure on the board? Why don't we finally just say, this is an awful lot of work. It takes an awful lot of time. We'll just hire somebody and they'll go raise the money. Get that Schumacher done. Let's get out. I think we'll do it. Send them out there knocking on doors and raising the money. Anybody doing that? Why not? I do know why not, so do you, but boards don't know unless told often that it doesn't work. It's a fairly simple reason. It doesn't work. On the food chain of life, paid fundraisers are down. On the food chain of life, paid fundraisers are down fairly low. We don't like them, donors don't like them, prospects don't like them, nobody's really keen on paid fundraisers. So the facts of life say that if we're going to fundraise successfully, every successful fundraising program you see or look at has volunteers engaged. And in doing so, we have an extremely demanding job. It says on the cover of this, the delicate balance. What is the delicate balance? The delicate balance is that I have to tell these people who employ me, I have to tell the people who make the decisions about my continued professional life that they have to do something they don't basically want to do. And I have to nudge them and cajole them and push them and do a whole lot of things to make this happen. And I have to make it more art than science. what do I have to do? Well, there are a couple I have to pat, and there are a couple I have to hit. And there are a couple I have to watch, because God knows what they're going to do. Start to sound familiar? And I have to do that all the time, constantly find that balance. Who do I reward? Who do I nudge? Who do I keep an eye on? How do I balance my capacity to do that against what I have in the way of time and energy and commitment? Yet the best fundraising programs seem to have active, engaged volunteers who are getting that kind of support. All the time, day in and day out. Go with me to page 2. But Ed, the volunteer fundraiser said, the volunteer board member says, nobody told me this when I was recruited. I didn't join this board to fundraise. No, I love what the Art Museum does, but I'm not a fundraiser. Or even better, I'll do anything for the Art Museum but fundraise. Right, that's right. I'll bake something, I'll bring some cookies, maybe. Let me be blunt. You have the board you deserve. You recruited it, you helped put it together. If it's a bunch of lemons, you got it. And it is really unfair, and let me tell you as a volunteer, I feel it's unfair, to be told about the board's role and responsibility, to be recruited and not to have anybody mention fundraising. And then to arrive at the first board meeting to hear the announcement of the oncoming capital campaign. I feel really sandbagged. So, this process starts, this process of building fundraising and the culture of the board at the time of recruitment. And if your nominators and nominating committee won't do that, then you're going to have a constant process of religious conversion. Board members who didn't come on to help with fundraising who now have to be converted to fundraisers. Very difficult task. So what should happen? I was recruited recently for a board. Very nice recruitment, I thought. Well done. They said to me, Ed, here's what we ask our board members to do. Ergo, we're going to ask you to do. Attend 80% of all board meetings. Attend 80% of all committee meetings. Attend the annual board retreat. Attend the annual auction. Participate in the phone-a-thon. Bring names to the table of prospective donors. Ask where you have connections for contributions and make a gift. That's all we want you to do. Now, what they didn't say was very interesting. What they didn't say was, if you can't do these things, thanks very much, but we don't really want you on the board. I don't believe most recruitments are that straightforward. I hear recruitments that go like, oh, it's a wonderful agency, you'll love the people, the board's really nice, the executive director's terrific, why don't you join us? I hope we're past that, because if we're not, we're going to continue to have people around the board table who find that you're asking them to do something they weren't prepared to do or hadn't thought about. Now, are we going to run off a lot of board prospects if we actually tell them the truth? Won't that be a terrifying experience for people? The answer is yes, you will run off some prospects, but you'll get the board members you want. So, selection. There's some first-rate fundraising organizations in this community, aren't there? And they've done a lot of good volunteer training. And those volunteers will ultimately lead their boards. So, yeah. They're already trained. They already understand fundraising. They already have skill and experience. I always watch in a community who's coming off a capital fund drive. You know what happens after a big capital fund drive? The system sort of disbands, doesn't it? Volunteers walk away pretty much happy and celebrating. The staff has a tendency to go to a rest home for quiet periods of time. And what you can do, if you're smart in that community, is find some of those volunteers for your board. So selection ought to include the criterion, does this person that we're selecting have any fundraising background or experience? And in the 90s, it's increasingly, a friend of mine asked me recently, he said, Ed, I'd like to serve on a board, but I don't want to be on one that fundraises. Can you name one? And you know, I couldn't. I actually couldn't name one. In the metropolitan Seattle community, I could not name a board that I knew was not fundraising. So, yes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
You don't seem to address it in your list of stuff. What do you do about dead wood? How do you gracefully dump dead wood? Wait for them to die or what?
Well, there are two things, it seems to me, that are appropriate and legitimate. And it's a good question. The question was dead wood. Here we go. We've got a board of 20 people. We've got 30% who are terrific, 30% who are all right, reluctant, 30% who we can train, and 10% inert. Now, the inerts, we need to do something about. So it seems to me two things come into play. One, what do your bylaws tell you about terms? And I hope they tell you people have 3-year terms and must be invited to continue. And so the truth is that some board members ought to conclude their term, get a plaque, be plaqued, as they say, and be sent off to board heaven, wherever that is. And some board members are very happy to do that. So that's one sort of gentle process that's appropriate. It respects people's previous commitment and effort in the organization. Boards change, don't they? And the board job changes. So I can have board members who once did a wonderful job for the organization, but are no longer willing to take on the task that the 90s demand. The second thing that I see happening that's very interesting is if I go through 2 nominating cycles and bring on people who are very different than the people who are still on the board, both in their energy and commitment and willing to fundraise, those people remaining on the board are more likely than ever to quietly resign because they begin to get uncomfortable. And they leave gracefully as well in most cases because I think we need to be caring about people and what they've done for our organizations. But I don't believe we can do much into the 90s without board members willing to step up to fundraising. Subset, caveat, do not bring on board members one at a time. There's a very interesting piece of research that says the most likely board member to resign is the board member brought on singly. And I see organizations with a board of 18 who really don't want to fundraise, scrambling to find one person who might come on and really be engaged. And that one person comes on and looks around the board table for about 90 days and quietly slips away. Bring on new volunteers in classes, in groups, at least 3, ideally 4 or 5. Then you can have an impact on the process. But bringing in single sort of Lone Ranger volunteers to change the tone of the board operation is likely to result in their leaving. And I see it happen over and over again, and I advise you not to do it. Recruitment. Please recruit with the list of expectations. Ed, we need you for 8 hours a month. We need you to attend the annual board retreat. It's in the spring on a Saturday. We expect you're going to buy a table at the auction. We have an annual phone-a-thon in the fall. We need you not only to participate on the phone, but to bring some names. Now I begin to get a picture of what you want from me. And if I'm a reasonable person with an interest in your cause, I'm very likely to say yes. I also might say, well, that's a lot, and for now I don't think I can do that. Come back and see me a year from now. Finally, orientation. If there's any field I've ever worked in where redundancy is a virtue, it's in development. So now, in the orientation of our new trustees, which I know we all hold, that roughly 90% sat on such a nominating committee in a nonprofit institution a number of years ago, and as we designed the profile of the new board members we should be seeking, there was an uncomfortable moment for the three of us, and then finally somebody said, well, it's not us, is it? And the answer was no, it wasn't. We were good board members for the period in the life of the organization we were board members. We were now nominating people for the next 3 years. And the institution was changing, and the people coming in had to have different skills and expertise and credentials. And the good news for this institution was we were reasonably mature enough to do that. But it also feels a little strange to say, I'm no longer the best board member for this organization, even though I might have been at some point. And that's the hard part of this process. We can talk about this as much as we want, but when we sit across from the prospect and we don't deliver the messages that help them be a good board member, then everything else you do is extremely difficult. I knew finally I had succeeded at this when I overheard a conversation at a board table. And by the way, it took a while to succeed at this. A new trustee turned to an old trustee and said, do we all do this fundraising stuff? Do we all do this fundraising stuff? And the experienced trustee turned and said, oh yeah, we all do it. I could have jumped. See, not it's weird, but we have to. Not we all hate it, but we do it. But oh yeah, we all do it. That, folks, is called a fundraising culture. Oh yeah, we all do it. If I can get my 20 board members to say that, I've died and gone to fundraising heaven. Nobody's going to jump up and down and say, what a thrill it is to fundraise for this organization. I don't know any such people. But if I can get the board to thinking this is the ordinary work of the board and the organization, I'm vastly better off. And I do that by bringing in trustees who think that way and reinforcing that thinking process. Page 3. One of the problems we have with recruiting board members and talking about fundraising is they think we're talking about just one thing, and it's called asking. And that one activity is the one that paralyzes everybody the most. I'll do anything for the organization, Ed, but ask. Well, usually it goes, I'll do anything but ask for money. And then my rejoinder is, well, will you ask for land or boats or art or music, jewelry? Well, no, Ed, you know what I mean. So, having said that, I think one of the dilemmas that we face is describing the fundraising job so that most board members can contribute to fundraising and don't see asking as the only activity. And so the first thing I'd like to do is describe the fundraising job as I might describe it to you if you were a board I was working with. Here's what we're going to ask you to do. And see if this list isn't a more manageable list for board members than worrying about asking. Number 1, we're going to ask you as board members to help us with research. Well, what the heck is research? Research is the answer to the question, where's the money? Our board members often know where the money is, and we don't. And if they're trained to help us answer that question, we're likely to do much better at fundraising. They know people have money, they know companies that have money, they know where money is. They're not used to bringing that information forward, but they do know. So, role 1 for fundraising volunteers, help us with research. The second role, place in life, the person on the boards I serve on with the lowest socioeconomic status. What can I say? I don't have the money anybody else has, I don't have the clout anybody else has. But I am a relatively fearless asker for causes I believe in. So we're talking about our prospect, and what do we know about our prospect? I can't get through the 2 secretaries and an administrative assistant to even talk to the person, much less get an appointment. But sitting beside me is someone who played tennis with the prospect last Saturday. He says, oh, I could never ask you. And I say, great. You get us in, I'll do the asking. Now, we've got somebody who can get us past all the doors, through all the secretaries and administrative assistants, into where we can make the call. And as a team of 2, we're a wonderful team because I've got a door opener and an asker. That's all I need. So I can say to the volunteer, you don't have to ask. We don't want you to ask where you're uncomfortable. But we've got somebody who will ask. So get us in, we'll ask it again. The third role. And this is a role volunteers usually like if we help them with it. It's the education and cultivation of prospective donors. Education and cultivation. Schmoozing. Right? Charming. Being bright, articulate. One of my clients is a zoo and aquarium. We have had over the last year 40 what we call beluga breakfasts. We invite 5 to 7 people in the community who have leadership roles or deep pockets to come and join us for 45 minutes while the zoo director does a little dog and pony show. A couple of the trustees are always there and do the invitations. The development director is there, and we've run over 100 people through this process. We haven't asked anybody for anything. Are we going to? Funny you should mention. Yes, there's a big campaign coming. But what we knew was the community didn't know us well enough to support a big campaign. And we needed to get to know them. Now, trustees have really liked this role. They have invited friends and colleagues. They have met people they didn't know. There are always 2 trustees at these breakfasts. What they get to do is sing and dance about the wonders of the zoo and aquarium. Great role, very appropriate role, one that we want our volunteers to do, and one that most volunteers are not threatened by at all in this process. Now we get to the hard parts. If you're going to be a fundraising volunteer, you're going to have to be a donor. And I've heard the arguments that, I give all this time, I serve on the board, I'm bringing my expertise to the table, you want my money too? And the answer is yes. Yes, as Darby said, Toto, I don't think it's Kansas anymore. It's the 1990s. There's no way to go out into the world and fundraise without answering the question, has the board given? And the answer is supposed to be yes. 100% of the board have given. We don't care how much, from $1 to $100,000. So we're going to be asked that by corporate grant makers, we're going to be asked that by foundations, and increasingly in my experience, we're asked that by individuals. And board members who make calls are also likely, more likely than ever, to be asked. So I say to board members the night of a phone-a-thon, the first gift's going to be really easy. Get your checkbook out. that check. Yeah, don't they all leave? No, actually they don't, interestingly enough. I've had two experiences in the last year that I think confirm for me, and I've then talked to other people about this. And something's going on that I think is very meaningful. It has to do with the frequency with which we're all asked for contributions. And we're all asked a lot, aren't we? Mail, phone, people in our face at times. I've gone to ask for a number of gifts for a cause that I serve as a volunteer, and I've had two different responses that I've never had before. I've been doing this for 20 years as a volunteer. One person looked at me and said, Ed, I'll match whatever you give. I'll match whatever you did. Well, it's good that I did something, because it was a very awkward moment. And the second person looked at me, I'm asking for a $25,000 gift. Now, this person knows me, and also knows I'm probably not a $25,000 donor, but said to me, Ed, how much did you give to the campaign? Not did you give, but how much? And what they were looking for was probably a proportionate amount to their giving. Now, that isn't going to happen to everybody, and we don't need to terrify people with those kinds of stories, but the truth is, donors are smarter than they've ever been. Prospects know more about fundraising than they ever knew. They are tougher asked than ever before, and some of our board members are going to face those kinds of questions. What have you done? I'll match what you've done. I don't want to send my board members out and put them in that kind of situation, which will create for them a situation that they'll never repeat, probably. I'd like them to go out the door having made their contribution. The next task is a task that is the one that causes us most of the trouble here, and that's asking. Let me give you my formula for asking and volunteer boards. I've never worked with a board where every volunteer was an asker. If you have such a board, I'd be thrilled, and it would be extraordinary. So I've come to set my expectations closer to reality, and my expectations, I think, fit what's possible. So I've got 100% of my board members. I'm going to get 30% of them for doing it well and with some energy. Right? 30%, that's all. These people actually say they kind of like this stuff. And they do it well, and they have some fun doing it. I'd like to get 30% who will do it, but they're reluctant. So I am dragging them into it, gnashing their teeth. But they will do it. They'll get on the phone and make the calls. They'll make a periodic individual call. They really will do it. So that's 60% of my board asking. I'd like 30% to do the other task well. They cultivate, they educate, they research, they do all the other things that are on this list. They open doors, but they're not askers. And then there are 10% I wouldn't send out to get lunch, much less send out to ask. They are lovely people, but they don't like it. They're not going to be good askers. It's no fun for them. It's real stressful. Why put them in that position? They can help periodically with some connection. So this is my very happy scenario. And I have development staff people from time to time tell me, well, I can't get all the board to fundraise. And my answer is, well, nobody gets all the board to fundraise. In fact, it's not even a remotely reasonable expectation. 60%, you're doing just fine. More than that, you're doing better than most everybody's doing. Much less than that, you don't have enough horsepower. They're becoming are clear, aren't they? One is if you don't ask, you don't get. By the way, that's an interesting piece to share with board members. Some of them think money just comes in. And it would be nice if money just came in, but I've never been anywhere where that happened. Two, the more you ask, the more you get. Seems to be consistently true. The more you ask, the more you get. I spent 6 years as the development director of an institution raising over $1 million a year. I never asked for a gift. So who was out there asking? Well, upwards of 200 volunteers. Were they brilliant? Yes, they were brilliant. Did they finish by saying that Schumacher's a really good fundraiser? Yes, strange as it may seem, that's what they said. What was I doing? Facilitating this process that all of us have to facilitate, of keeping all these people out in front of us, and patting some and rewarding others, and punching a few and ducking a few others, and hoping that we can keep the balance of this. So 60% is a terrific number. If I could get this to happen, I'd be very pleased. If I could get these folks involved in these other tasks, I would be very pleased. You know, get them to research, get them to open doors, get them to educate and cultivate. Those make a difference, don't they? Now let's talk about asking. The pit. Yes?
Before you go on to asking, can I put back to research just a moment?
Yes.
Because that isn't something that volunteers seem to do naturally, and I've run into it on a couple of volunteer boards that I serve on. If you could
Well,
elaborate how that
yeah,
works.
let me say what I think the resistance is, and then let's talk about how you work around it. I think the resistance initially is that this is prying, that this is nosy, that we don't really need to know all this about people. And that I'm not going to go over and turn people's garbage cans over to find out about them. Somebody said to me. So to start with, I have to create an environment in which I reinforce the notion that the more appropriate information we have about the prospect, the better able we are to ask for a gift that makes that prospect happy and gets us the gift. There's no other reason for research. If the outcome of the research isn't that we make that prospect happy when we make that call and we get the gift we want for our institution, we are doing something that's not legitimate. So that's why we do this. Not because we're nosy, not because we love to pry, but because we want to do a good job of asking. Number two, I think sometimes we go too far. I had a very angry major donor in Seattle come to me because he wanted to know if it was legitimate what the institution that he's part of was doing. And it's very interesting what they were doing. He had a call from someone in, I think, this state at the office where they keep track of all the land holdings and records that are public records. And the institution had called here to find out how much land he held in the state. And he said to me, what the hell do they have to know that for? What does that have to do with my giving to the institution? And I had a hard time convincing him, in fact myself, that that was a legitimate search for information. Did we need to know his land holdings outside of the state of Washington in order to figure out how to ask him for a contribution? I don't think so. So I do think the question of research is a question that's going to get debated over and over again, and I want to be careful about how much we do. Number 2 or 3, wherever I am, research processes in groups are very awkward. I would not do group prospect review or group research. If I want to know what a prospective board member knows about somebody or even a list of somebody's, I would work with them one-on-one with a clear assurance of confidentiality. Here's the list of the Buffalo Club members. Who do you know? what can you tell me about them that won't violate their confidentiality? And we sit across the table from each other and talk about that. Stanford, in its billion-dollar campaign, did a lot of silent prospect review with groups, which seemed to work extremely well, actually. They got you into a room, they put a form in front of you with a name on it, and they asked you to complete the form without ever talking to anybody else. So confidentiality was clearly ensured. And you could put on that form anything that was helpful to the university campaign or not, depending on how you felt about it. What they were able to do was accumulate enough information that was pretty much public information to know how to go about asking. So yes, it's a task people are anxious about because they don't understand what we're doing. But it looks like we're doing anything inappropriate. I mean, it's not very, it doesn't take the board member very long to figure out you may be researching him, her. If they don't like what you're doing with everybody else, they sure are not going to be comfortable with what you're doing with them. Yes?
The scenario that I want to mention, I think fits in just to what you're saying now. I used to live in Chicago area in a very wealthy community. My husband and I are not wealthy. However, I would say 3, 4, 5 times a week, I would get some kind of telephone call from somebody who pronounced our name wrong anyway, asking directly for donations. And I know it had to do with our mailing address. It had nothing to do with any kind of research. Is this what you're talking about, group?
Well, I think that's just sort of dumb fundraising.
Well, it is stupid, but I mean.
Yeah, it really is. It's designed to aggravate well, what they've done is a zip code search. And the zip code search has told them that a lot of people with a lot of money live in this zip code. So then they get a reverse directory, they get all the phone numbers, and they start calling.
Okay.
And it's designed to make as many people mad as possible.
Oh,
For your organization. Now somebody here is in a lot of direct telemarketing, what have you, probably would be very distressed at what I'm saying. But frankly, I don't know anybody that's making that work, and I know a lot of instances where it's just making people mad.
yeah.
So that was what was going on, basically. They did a zip code search. It's that raw. I mean, it isn't anything very sophisticated. Zip code search, reverse directories, get the phone numbers, call people. Hope these rich folks will give us money. That's like getting the list of the Bar Association and writing to them. Give me a break. You think you're going to get checks back? Silly. That's silliness. Bar Association members must get 35 requests a week. If they don't know you or have any relationship to you or have any linkage to you, why are they going to send you a check? So sometimes we have some faith that if we get enough names of the right rich folks, they'll send us money. I have no notion that that's true, and I have nobody with any experience that says that's true. If you live in Seattle, by the way, one name always emerges on such lists. A fellow by the name of Gates. Let's get Bill Gates, everybody says. Mr. Gates lives on a compound it would take the 3rd Marines to get through. And then he'd be videotaping them on the way in and making a new kind of media play out of it. That's a kind of fantasy that sometimes our trustees have, too. Well, if we just got the list of, we'd find some donors. We might find a donor or two. What is it, 1% if we're lucky? But that's not how you're going to build a donor base. That's an exercise in futility for most organizations. Now, I'm going to ask these volunteers to ask, and the one task they like less than anything else is asking. So I want to talk about what you need to do to support volunteers to get them to ask. And I want to say that it's a lot. Most volunteers come up to asking, and what they see if they don't have any experience at all is this deep hole you're asking them to fall into. And it creates a fundamental feeling of fear and anxiety. Now maybe as a volunteer asker you have the same fear and anxiety. I certainly do. So what we've got to do is we've got to build a bridge across this so that the person can get over to the other side. Let me talk about what the parts of that bridge are. Number 1, we have to do some education. Education about what? Education about our organization. If you're going to go out and ask me to represent the organization, I have to be knowledgeable about the organization. But don't all our board members know what we're doing? Aren't they articulate about our programs? Can't they talk about our budgets? Give them a test someday. I periodically, when I'm in my more aggressive consultant stance, stand in front of a board of trustees that I haven't seen before and say, would y'all just take a minute and write the mission statement out? Oh. Well, heads usually do go down, and people start writing. And then if you collect them, you've got 15 board members, you've got 9 mission statements. And some of them don't even seem to be in the same organization. So we need to start with the understanding that before board members can ask, they truly need to be articulate about our cause and our programs. And that education we don't do sufficiently most of the time to help our volunteers get out and do this kind of fundraising. Number 2, another part of the bridge. This has to do with the development of a training program about it for a minute. You're talking to me as a trustee. You say, Ed, we want you to make these 5 calls. And I say to you, I'm willing to do that, but I really don't know what to do. What do I say? What do I say if she says no? What do I say if he says maybe? So where's your training in asking? 45 to 90 minutes is all you need to do. A little role play, a little practice, a chance to say the words out loud. Will you consider a $1.25 million gift to this building? Right? See, it flows off the tongue. Very easy. Why? Because I practice, not because I'm a genius. I get board members to go home and look into the mirror and say no firmly to themselves. And with a very straight face. And I ask them then, what happened? And they begin to say, well, Ed, nothing happened. And that's right. Nothing happens when somebody says no. Your ears don't fall off, your tongue doesn't whack, and nothing really happens. It's all right. We can deal with no, right? We know no is a frequent answer. It's okay. See, board member rejection is one of the things board members fear most. I'm going to go out, I'm going to call Monica, she's going to say no. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Will my life end? Will it shorten my life expectancy? None of the above is going to happen. But how do I know that? I know that because I've had some training to deal with that. I've had some practice. I've had a chance, I do phonathons. I make sure the first call is not to any of our prospects, but to a loved one. Call your wife, partner, spouse, call your cousin, brother, aunt, and do your whole spiel on the phone. Tell them to shut up at the other end and listen to you. People will do it. They'll have a great time doing it. And for the first time they are coming out of their mouths, the words that have been floating around in their heads. And the second call is much easier. So, practice, a degree of assurance of expectations. I sit at board meetings periodically. I watch development directors say, now here are your 10 names, go get them. That's like a suicide pact with your trustees. Here are your 10 names, go get them. What is that? If I'm a trustee, I say, you take your 10 names and you go get them. A couple of things about assignments to trustees about that. Number 1, reasonable expectations. Never more than 5 names at a time. Yes, Ed, we're going to ask you to make 20 calls this year, but we're only going to get them to you 5 at a time. Because actually, there's some pretty good research that says you give me a list bigger than that, I'm likely to get myself to Chicago. By the way, do you notice how much your board members travel after they get fundraising assignments? Mine were always like out of town. Oh, Ed, I didn't do that, I was in, Memphis. These are people who never traveled before we got fundraising assignments. They're all traveling. They either changed out, I don't know what they were. So, bad assignments lead to bad responses. So make good assignments, and that's the next part of this bridge that I want to talk about. Make good assignments. What are good assignments? Good assignments are clearly defined tasks in a clearly defined time frame that seems to you and the asker to be achievable. And you make these 5 calls in the next 60 days. Subset to that, that's very important. See, what do I think I'm supposed to do if you give me 5 calls to make? How many gifts am I supposed to get? 5. Does anybody get 5 to 5? No, let's make the assignment even clearer. Ed, here are the 5 names. If you get 2 of these, you're doing very well. If you get 3 of these, we give you a t-shirt that has a big Superman emblem on it. If you get 4 of these, we build a statue to you on the lawn of the grounds of the campus. Now I have expectations, right? I know if I make the first 2 calls and people turn me down, I'm still doing fine. Or if I make the first 2 calls and one person's moved and the other one's died, I'm still doing fine. Instead, what we do is we create by not saying what the expectations are, the expectation I'm supposed to get all these gifts. As a result, I come back with 3 gifts and I feel bad. Gee, I'm sorry, I only got 3 of the 5. Instead, I ought to feel terrific. 3 out of 5 is great. But we don't create a defined expectation. I watch phonathons do the same thing. Here are your 20 calls. Go get them. So I get on the phone, I think I'm supposed to get 20 gifts. The first 3 people turn me down, I want to go home. I don't like this. This isn't fun. I tell people when the first 2 donors turn me down on the phone to go get another phone, actually. Because it's really the instrument that's the problem. You just need another phone. And it'll be much better. Some phones are better than others for me. So what you want to do is help people achieve, don't you? Because see, next year you want them to come back to the phone-a-thon. Next year you want to come back to the annual campaign. Next year you want them to sell those tables at the auction. So you've got to design a system where they know they've succeeded. The best line I ever heard after a phone-a-thon was somebody who left and said, that wasn't so bad. No, that was great. Best evening I've ever had. But that wasn't so bad. So I'll come back and do it next year. So let's set expectations. And let's make them reasonable. Materials. Good materials. I always love watching people go out to make their calls and the materials are like clutched in their hands. You've got to have this stuff. You've got to have it to give to the prospective customer. But by the time I get it there, it's all wet with perspiration. But it makes a difference. People want something in their hands. They want to make the call and leave this behind. And you need to supply that. It needs to be, doesn't need to be fancy. Paper never raised any money, remember that? Paper doesn't raise money, people raise money. But people want something in the way of supporting materials. I've got to provide it. For lack of a better word, I want to call this support. And I want to describe it. When I worked as a development director, one day my boss came into the office and sat down across from me and said, Ed, what is it you actually do all day? I said, I know we're raising money, but I'm never quite sure what you do. I know you go to lunch with a lot of people, and that looks pretty good. But what is it you do all day? And I realized in describing what I did all day was that support function. I'm on the phone half the day with volunteers who are out asking. I'm meeting with volunteers who have assignments. I'm cajoling and coaching and training and supporting and teaching and saying you did great, not to worry, and let's try this a different way. I'm spending all that energy on people so that people can go raise money. job, largely. Oh yes, I'm seeing that the mail gets out and the proposals get written and a few of those other miscellaneous things, but mostly I'm spending my time in a support function. Volunteers, if they're gonna fundraise, need support. And the last part of the bridge is just what you would expect it to be, recognition. Recognition really is the final step in this process. Recognition is as important to our askers as it is to our givers. I have a friend who works in a wonderful nonprofit institution, and every year he produces the annual list of donors, all that stuff, right? Many of you do that. The annual report of contributions and the alpha listing and the chance to spell somebody's name wrong and make them mad. That's I think of it as. And for several years right now, he's tried to convince the organization that they should not do that they should only publish a list of the askers. Because in his opinion, they have the harder job. And so why don't we just recognize the askers, forget the donors? Well, he's not persuaded anybody. But his point is well taken, is the askers, in fact, have the harder job. And what are we doing for them? What kind of recognition are we doing? What kind of celebrations are we doing? We don't celebrate our success nearly enough, institutionally, individually. And I think when you do, you simply encourage people to do better. I would never end a campaign without a celebration. I would never end an evening of calling without a little celebration. Every chance I get, I'm saying, thank you, you've done great, look at how much difference this makes. Big ways, small ways, whatever you need to do it. Because if you don't do it, people will forget how important it is to play this role in organization. So that's the bridge. That's where we take people. If we get them across that bridge, then what we've got is people willing to fundraise over here who say they really can do it and it's not too bad. That's a lot of work. Easy for me to say than for you to do. If you're an executive director and you're running an agency and you're trying to do fundraising simultaneously, and I'm laying out this list, you're thinking, forget it. Life is too short, I can't do all of that. Well, do the pieces you can do on a more modest scale, but I think they're fundamental to continued success in this arena. Absolutely fundamental. And especially to getting people to ask for the gift. Well, let's move along. In the interest of time, support systems for volunteer fundraisers. We've already talked about them as we talked about this bridge. I've got another case. I've got to be able to articulate it, right? You've got to do that for me. You've got to help me do that. I have to have some staff person I can call for support. If it's the executive director or the administrative assistant or somebody. Volunteer systems are fine for support, but sooner or later, I need to be bumped back to a staff person. It needs to be in the system. Give me some materials. Give me a brag sheet. Here are the 15 great things our organization's done in the last year. I want to repeat those. I want to be fairly glib about those, actually. Training. I talked about training, lots of it. What about those of you who have boards that don't do training? See, I worked with a board once, and they said, Ed, you train dogs. We don't go to training. So what did we do? Well, we did what we call preparation. And they did preparation, they just wouldn't go to training. So sometimes we had to do preparation over breakfast at 7:30, and sometimes at 5:30, and sometimes 2 at a time instead of 15 at a time. But we did it, didn't we? We're going to make this call. It's an important call to the senior vice president of the bank. It's a big request, so we're going to have a cup of coffee. We're going to talk about how we do it. Now, they come together to do that, but they sure wouldn't go to a 90-minute training session without asking for the gift. So you're a pragmatist. You do whatever you need to do. You do it in whatever setting you have to do it. Assignments, I talked about those, make them good, make them sound, make me understand them, make me know I can succeed, help me be a successful fundraiser. Recognition, I'm always most suspicious of those people who say, oh, you know, you don't have to do anything for me. Yeah, please do. Please do something. It can be modest and careful, it can be extravagant, but do something. When people do this task that we know they're reluctant to do it and do it well, there's got to be some reward for it. Quality training for your volunteers. Let me talk about the 90-minute training session. What's in it? Number one, how do we deal with no? The most frequent answer in fundraising is no. Our volunteers have got to get used to the notion they're going to get no's and it's all right. So practice. Have everybody look at everybody else and say no. Very firmly. Give everybody play money, and the people with play money in their hands turn to the people who don't have play money and say, no, I won't give you this. See, when everybody starts figuring out it's all right, we can say no to each other. Friends. Oh, yes, I love this one. I'll do anything but ask my friends. Right? How many of you heard that? So I want to know, like, do you have enemies you ask? Who have you got? You know, if your friends won't do it, who's going to do it? We need names here. The truth of good fundraising is that most people wind up asking some of their friends and associates. It's standard operating procedure. Not all, not everybody. We all know there are people we wouldn't call on under any circumstances. So don't ask anybody to do that. But sooner or later, I know a whole fundraising program has been built on board members raising 10 names a year. They now have 500 donors. They're raising $50,000 a year. They've done that by every board member bringing 10 names a year. Because they don't have any natural constituency. So it's the only way to build a database. Is there anything brilliant about that? Absolutely not. Do board members start to say by the third year, I don't have any more friends? Someone said that to me recently. And I don't know anybody else. I can't conjure up any more names. Besides that, all 20 of the first group are calling me back. And they want to get for their cause. So there's an end to this. But this organization is raising $50,000 from names brought by board members. Money. We don't have enough time to talk about money. What we do have enough time to talk about is to remember that people have a lot of hang-ups about money. There's a lot of research about it. We still find it in the list of things causing most marital distress. And somehow, I need to help my volunteers understand that the discussion with a prospective donor is not about their money. What's it about then? It's about your organization. And their money only appears in the one line that takes about 4 seconds. Would you consider joining our Founders Club at $1,000? That's the only discussion we ever have about their money. The one line where we ask for the gift. It's ludicrous even to think we would be sitting across from people talking to them about their money. And we used to not talk about sex and politics and money. Now we've got 2 of the 3. The one we still don't talk about is money. So why would we go out and talk to people about their money? We're going out to talk about our institution and the great stuff it does. And with one quick line, we talk about their contribution. That's all that conversation involves. Fools. Yeah, I'm not going out and make a fool of myself doing this. Heard that from anybody? What seems to underlie that when you examine it is a sense that if I go out and do this for the organization, I'm going to be asked questions I can't answer. So, in the preparation of materials and training, we enable our volunteers to know that this is a relatively risk-free activity. They do know most of the reasonable answers. We're building a gym. So what's the cost per square foot? Shouldn't I know that? What are we doing about parking? Shouldn't I know that? There's a running track around the inside and tennis courts on the top. Shouldn't I know that? Yes. Well, the person I'm talking to pipe we're using. Should I know that? Probably not. So give me a list of reasonable facts and information about the organization. I can be a good asker for you. Finally, the dread fear of zeros. That's what those zeros symbolize. Those of us are in the fundraising business are in one of the few businesses where zeros are really meaningful. And the more zeros you have, the merrier. But I found that volunteers in the asking process have there's something goes on that where asking for $100 is easy, but asking for 1,000 is hard. And asking for 1,000 is easy, but asking for 10,000 becomes difficult. And asking for 10,000 might be easy, but asking for 100,000 is troublesome. And it's apparently people were attacked in their cribs by little zeros flying all around them. And so they're still reacting to that. Training people to ask for big gifts is really no different than training people to ask for anything. It really is as easy for me to say a million as 1,000, isn't it? It comes trippingly off the tongue, basically. So what you want to do then is, here I have my top volunteer team. They're going out to ask for our first $1,000 contributor. We're going to build the first club of $1,000 donors. And there's a lot of anxiety about it. And all I need to do is practice. Say 1,000. Go to the blackboard, write 1,000 20 times, like in third grade. You know? Write 1,000. You can say it. You can do it. It's just a couple of zeros, not to worry. The best asker I ever worked with asked for astoundingly big gifts without seeming to bat an eye. And I wondered how in the world he did it. And he answered me one day by saying, Ed, I've thought about this for a long time, and I realize they're just zeros and they're not mine. They're just zeros, they're not mine. That's all I can ask with you. Moving right along. How are we doing on time here? Are we running out? Oh, we are out. The fundraising team. The executive director, the board president, the development staff person. You've got to be working together. Organizing for fundraising? Yes. Please organize. And do you need committees? I'd say yes. And you probably need a development committee. Sometimes task groups can take on specific pieces of work that's meaningful to them. We'll come back after the break and take care of the last couple of these, and I will then go on beyond that. 15 minutes and we're back to work.